Now I want to bring up Michael Roth. And you, from what I'm hearing, Michael is the reason that Pennsylvania is the envy of all the other states, in terms of our hemp. So, Michael, take it away, and then we'll hear from Anna. Take it.
Yeah, I don't take credit for that. It's the people at this table who showcase the great work that I was simply able to make the connections to. My job at the state is to be a facilitator and a connector. I'm not the showstopper, so I just want to be clear on that. So again, there's been many others who've been in this I'll call it a fight for a long time. But I'm happy to be joining up, and just for those that don't know, born and raised here in the city of Pittsburgh. I think I'm the only city slicker in the Department of Agriculture. But happy to sort of bring those two things together, and I'll touch on that here in just a moment. My presentation is going to be a little bit different. I think it's going to be the very big picture. So just to give you that heads up. So taking a huge step back, talking about agriculture in the US, many challenges, and I could go through, current policies, a lot of the, debates in the Farm Bill and challenges, but I think this sums it up pretty well. So the Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack, Pittsburgher, by the way, as you can see there, he came out with some pretty stark language, and this was sort of his North Star, if you will, as he was thinking about what can USDA do for the climate, for sustainability for farmers. So very striking, during the pandemic, you had very large businesses, about 10% of all the farmers made money during the pandemic. And there were record profits in agriculture during the pandemic, but it was only for 10% of the farming companies. 50% lost money and 40% made money, but it wasn't from farming. That's a huge issue. So 90% of our farmers need help. The added challenge here is that 90% is way overly represented by small and medium farmers. What is Pennsylvania? Small and medium farmers. We're not the large, corn belt. We're not the large potato belt. We're not these commodity crop farmers. Our farmers are very diversified in what they grow. So unfortunately, they're falling into that area. So let's bring it into Pennsylvania. So we have 7.3 million acres in agriculture, about a quarter of our land. Agriculture in Pennsylvania is an economic powerhouse, 132.5 billion in output. We do take leadership in a number of different areas in agriculture. We're number one in mushrooms, number one in hardwoods, top 5 states for a lot of the commodities you're probably more familiar with. And one that always shocks people is we're number 3 in organic. So you think of the West Coast, it's usually California, Oregon, and then Pennsylvania pops out of nowhere in that. So very, very proud of that fact, to have that angle here as well. So like I said, the concern, though, is that our farmers are small and diversified, which is a strength. I don't want that to be, mischaracterized. But the problem is when they come against those who are subsidized very heavily or have other means of supporting their efforts, it's hard to compare the two. Another striking thing, when we talk to our ag departments in the Midwest or the West or the South, they're blown away that our average acre size is 139. That's nothing. So again, another challenge that we face here. So bringing this sort of back into the direction of hemp. And, my colleagues and I and folks in Pennsylvania have been sort of colloquially been calling this Vilsack's challenge. But the idea that we have to figure out how we create more revenue streams for farmers, particularly those small, mid-sized producers. So you wouldn't think that'd be super controversial. Unfortunately, it is. But we hope at the department to be sort of that neutral third-party voice that says, look, you can complain about that commodity, you can, diss this commodity, but at the end of the day, at least in my mind, what we're trying to do is create things in the toolbox of the farmer or things on the menu for the farmer that they can do. And I feel very strongly that hemp can be a part of that. So again, hemp is not the silver bullet for the ag community. It is not going to replace everything. It's not going to replace corn and soy, but it can go in rotation. It's going to be a part of the puzzle and another, like I said, tool in the toolbox for our farmers. So why does a Department of Agriculture, especially here in Pennsylvania, care about buildings? Why do we care about, why are we with the Green Building Alliance today? Well, like I said in some of the questions before, we're sort of used to this with our friends in the hardwood industry, but also it comes back to our mission, vision, and values. We are here to help the natural resources of Pennsylvania. And it's our vision to always, the key one here, being mindful of the ways that we interact with the biggest challenges of our time. Since I've worked at the department, we've been engaged in every major international conflict challenge that you can think of. Ukraine, people were reaching out to PA Department of Agriculture. With happening in the Middle East right now, reaching out to Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture for all sorts of reasons. I think the clearest example is COVID-19. Our phones didn't stop ringing. What can we do to help in various ways? Producer side, consumer side. So again, agriculture is the core. Hopefully, obviously not always the case, but hopefully people are interacting with agriculture at least 3 times a day with their meals, maybe more depending on your clothing and whatever else. But agriculture is just inherently ingrained. But I think most of us, especially from the city perspective, don't think of agriculture in our day-to-day life. So again, thinking about the benefits, if anyone's familiar, Phipps Conservatory just down the road here, they've championed One Health. The CDC champions the One Health concept, that human, animal, and sort of the natural environment, the health is all connected. I see hemp as a huge piece to the One Health discussion. Climate change, biomaterials, you've already heard about the carbon storing potential, but also think about the carbon offsetting of not using those fossil fuel-based materials. That's huge. Economic development, again, I'll get into this a little bit more here in just a second, but I just think there's so much potential for this to be additive to all industries. Again, advanced manufacturing, something Pittsburgh's trying to get into in a very big way. But to me, and again, this is my own sort of bleeding heart, being from Pittsburgh, being exposed to Green Building Alliance from a young age, and Phipps, it meets the triple bottom line. It's for people, planet, and profit. And I think that's often, as we all know, I'm preaching to the choir here, is often missed in discussions. So I want to break this down into that triple bottom line. So we'll start with sort of the social impact. So one, I just think it's so cool that we have a crop that you can say can house us, can clothe us, can feed us in a very positive way. So if anyone's unfamiliar with hemp seed, it's been legal this whole time. You can get it. Any grocery store, Giant Eagle has it. Trader Joe's has it, Whole Foods has it. Incredible complete protein, high in omega-3s, just an incredible opportunity for us to add nutrition to the food system. Again, safe building material, as we've talked about, and then biomass to energy. There's some projects there. Think about, could you do sort of a green coal, if you will, whether using CHP, biodigesters, there's a multitude of different ways that we can look at that. What I think is really compelling, though, is that this encompasses the whole workforce system. So it's not one of those really high-tech Silicon Valley things that only benefits coders or it only benefits the advanced manufacturers. This will create jobs from the labor to the PhD researcher to the community building side of things. There's no sort of part of the workforce system that isn't touched by this. The other thing, too, is thinking about how many communities in the United States have been negatively impacted by cannabis, the big term cannabis. We can flip that script and this can be an asset to those communities. I think of, growing up in Point Breeze, right across from me is Homewood, very different levels of health and safety in those areas. Homewood itself has the highest energy burden, I think still probably in the United States, right, guys? My friends from the city of Pittsburgh. Their money isn't going to food, it's not going to medicine, it's going to paying their utility bills. So again, could hemp be an asset for these communities that also face, housing stock that's old and challenging? Pittsburgh, obviously way too intimately familiar with that. Last point I want to make, just from a sort of economic development and sort of social impact, and this is one of my passions, and I know my city of Pittsburgh team back there, when I used to work with them, we talk about urban and rural healing. And I think there's no better time to try and address that than now, with all the vitriol, whether it's politics or, people that are from here or this and people from there or that. I think this can change that narrative. So right now, I didn't want to put the company names here because I don't want to call anyone out, but there's a company that makes pink foam. It's manufactured in Nanjing, China, shipped all the way here. And there's a distribution center of a large box store that I'm sure you could guess the name of. It's in Carlisle, PA. Think about the journey that that material took. It's a fossil fuel based material. Think of all the aspects of that versus what I sort of cutely said here. And if you're not from Pittsburgh, you may not understand it, but from 724 to 412. So 412 being the area code for Pittsburgh, 724 for a lot of the sort of surrounding areas. There's a huge difference between someone building that lead house or just their house in general, getting it from that farmer in Washington County who may never come up to Pittsburgh. That relationship is so completely different than just going to, I almost said the name, going to a big box store, buying that pink foam, having no relationship with it and not caring about it. But as we said, we should, like Cameron was pointing out, because it's a health impact. So to me, I think there's a whole social sort of impact piece to this where the farmer feels engaged in this process, the purchaser feels engaged in this process. Think about, we have a similar thing with hardwoods. People take pride in their hardwood floor because they said, oh, that came from right here, sustainably harvested Pennsylvania hardwood. Even more so, we're seeing it more concretely in the food space. Oh, I went to the grocery store. This honey is from down the road. This chicken is from the farmer in the next county over. Completely different relationship, completely different social dynamic that isn't driven by social media or the news. It's driven by those personal bonds and relationships. To me, that completely flips the script, and hemp can be a massive part of that. So again, I think we've touched on a lot of this carbon sequestration opportunity. The one that I think can be compelling for the agricultural community is the soil health perspective of this. So we've seen some early studies with our friends at the Stroudwater Research Center that it promotes soil microbial diversity, which is obviously a critical piece of soil health. And it needs very little fertilizer, like Lori was saying, a little bit of nitrogen in some cases. What's interesting at the Stroudwater Research Center is the picture here. On the left, where all the trees are, there's a stream running through there. And on the right is a couple acres of hemp. And the idea was that can you use hemp behind the sort of the trees that are filtering as a riparian buffer to suck up any excess nutrients that might be coming from your corn, your soy, your other things that need a lot of inputs. Incredible research. It's, I think, on year 4 now, and they published that ongoing. So I know that doesn't necessarily apply to Pittsburgh, but I can tell you from the center part of the state with the Chesapeake Bay, nutrient management is bar none the most important thing. So could hemp play a role in that? We talked before about replacing petroleum-based materials. I don't think I have to explain that too much, but from a waste perspective, I think it's just fascinating. The PA hemp home, let's say there comes a day that there's redevelopment, it has to be torn down. Does it go to landfill? No, it can literally just be composted. You can take the inside of those, you can take those walls that Cameron makes. People apply lime to their farm fields all the time. You can literally just compost it. That's a completely different dynamic than going to the landfill. Or in some cases, even reconstitute it and reuse it again. And then again, like I was saying on there, huge opportunities in the best management practices in the ag space. One that we have seen people doing. So when you pass a big construction site, usually those PennDOT projects, you see those big, they call them filter socks, but those big sort of, sometimes they're orange or black. They're filled with what looks like mulch. There's a lot of challenges with those, people just throwing sort of crap in there, and it has seeds, and now you have invasives going everywhere. Hemp could be a really great alternative for that as well. And things like biochar, that's sort of endless, but I'll stop there on that one. So to the economic impact, ESG has been a huge topic, but I think even beyond just the check boxes of sort of the scopes of ESG, if we start with the farmer being a part of the system, it has the ripple effect all the way up the supply chain. We already see grocery stores pushing on their producers. Can you do it this way? Can you do it that way? With this system, we can start it at the bottom and move it upwards. So a farmer that's providing that hemp, it can go to a decortication facility. It can be used to put in with bioplastics, building materials, fabrics, multitude of manufacturing opportunities. And like I said before, the workforce side, you're talking about, someone on their farm is in the same supply chain as someone who's doing advanced manufacturing advanced manufacturing, culinary medicine, you name it, hemp can play a role in it. So I think that's fascinating. Just a picture to show you, BMW has been putting hemp panels because they're lighter than carbon fiber in their cars. Not all of them, but some models, mostly in Germany. But again, this isn't made up. This isn't a dream. This is, actually happening. So just wanted to highlight that. So looking to the future, why, a lot of questions, why aren't we doing this now? Why aren't people doing it now? The two biggest things, again, processing, and I can promise you I'm actively working on it. Everyone at this table is actively working on trying to figure out how we do that. We want to make sure it's done in an appropriate way. And then we have no shortage of folks that are ready to do value added processing, whether it's non-woven fabrics, it's, building materials, whatever it might be, even on the food side as well with hemp seed. But again, we need that processing. One of the examples a lot of people will point to is the hemp industry is essentially like the oil industry. If the oil industry didn't have processing facilities to make asphalt, to make gasoline, to make all those value added processings, the hemp industry is in that same space. We know how to grow it. We know how to harvest it. Sort of pause there. We know how to put it into buildings. We know how to put it into the other materials. It's that last missing piece is the processing. The other thing, as I noted before, is policy. And PA has been instrumental in the new Farm Bill, the 2023 Farm Bill, which is looking to be the 2024 Farm Bill, unfortunately. But for those that don't know, the Farm Bill is the most influential bill in the United States when it comes to agriculture and also the food that goes on your plate. And the 2018 Farm Bill has a lot of issues in it when it comes to hemp. Could have been a little bit better, but at least it got us to the point where we could actually use hemp. But one of the things that was the challenge is that it sees hemp with one lens. It doesn't distinguish or discriminate between hemp for CBD, hemp for Delta 8, which was not intended to be allowed to happen, but it is because the way they wrote it, views them all the same. So the farmer that is, making the material for Drew's hemp block or Cameron's spraying has to get an FBI background check. They have to get fingerprinted. They have to do all this stuff because they're growing a fiber building material. So it's this insanity of a blatant flat policy that impacts all our farmers. So what we're trying to advocate for is that there's a separation in the Farm Bill that, yes, if you're doing cannabinoids, that has its own risks and its consumables and things like that. That needs to be treated differently than fiber and grain hemp, which does not have a risk. I could buy fiber and grain hemp products this whole 80-year period that it's been banned. I just couldn't grow it. So it doesn't really make sense that now that we're growing it, that those same people are treated exactly the same as someone that's doing something nefarious or someone that's doing cannabinoids that are not meant for construction or building materials. So again, a very frustrating situation. And lastly, looking to Dr. Mamari and some of his colleagues at Penn State as well, genetics are obviously going to be very important. As Lori had mentioned, that's really cool to see that 25-foot hemp stock, but is that really what's best for the clothing industry or what's best for the building industry? You have to figure that out. And then the materials themselves, again, that's where Dr. Mamari comes in, making sure they fit the scope and need of what we're doing. So to sort of wrap this up, again, why is the Department of Agriculture here talking to you at a sort of architectural type event? It's because I would put out there that the Department of Agriculture has a menu of options of things that you can choose from that will help you meet your LEED goal, will help you meet Passive House, will help you meet all these top tier standards, and it's right in your own backyard. I certainly appreciate the need to buy, the best windows from Germany and whatever it might be from across the pond. We can still do that. But there's a lot of stuff we can get right here while at the same time doing economic development for our rural friends just outside the county line. So everything, and I want to shout out our other friends in this space as well. So obviously there's hemp. We also are working with flax producers, so folks that might be familiar with linen, to do fabrics and things like that. Hardwoods, again, is a juggernaut here in the Pennsylvania agriculture community. Flooring, finishings, furniture. We're also trying to do some studies. Can we do cross-laminated timber with hardwoods? So most of the structural stuff you see in homes is softwoods. We're a hardwood state. We lead the nation in that. So trying to see how we can play a greater role there as well. Specialty crops, natural dyes, healthy materials, everything from onions to peppers. There's some interesting things there. And then the one that often gets looked over, but I did hear Cameron mention, is livestock. We have a growing sheep population here in Pennsylvania, partly associated with the growing solar industry, where the solar industry is using sheep for grazing instead of paying someone to mow. There's going to need to be a market to continue to support those sheep farmers. Wool is a great option. We also have some cashmere and alpaca and rabbit fur and llama all here in Pennsylvania as well. You'd be surprised what animals we have here in agriculture. My favorite is the water buffalo. You can go to Giant Eagle and get true mozzarella cheese from water buffalo. That's where the good stuff's from. We have 2 herds of water buffalo here in Pennsylvania. But again, just there's some unique things in this space that I think the architectural community, I'm sure, is tangentially aware of. But again, I feel that the Department of Ag, we do PA preferred with our food. Why couldn't an architect say, hey, I want to do a PA preferred home? So I'm going to do the insulation, structural materials, all from Pennsylvania products. So that's it. And of course, we'll do the questions after, but really appreciate it. And just thank you all so much for being here. Appreciate it.